All right.
All right. Bob Turner, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am. I'm here. Yep.
Amazing. Then we can go ahead and get started.
All right, welcome everybody. We'll start with a roll call. I'm Kevin Conrico, the chair of the subcommittee for passive recreation land.
I'm Ann Babcock, and I'm a member of the subcommittee, passive recreation.
Good morning, Jennifer. Ag Land Resources.
Allison James, Parks and Recreation.
Jill Carter, I'm the Open Space Bond Manager. Bob, if you'd like to take us off on that.
I'm Bob Turner online. I'm with the Land Conservation Advisory Board.
And Rachel, I think you're last.
Everybody, Rachel Sawyer here. I am with Strategic Partnerships with the county.
So obviously we only have 3 subcommittee members here, so we do not have a quorum. We won't be voting on anything anyways, so that's not really an issue, but just wanted to point that out.
All right, then no need to take to a vote of the approval of today's agenda, nor the minutes from last, but I approve.
We can have the approval of the minutes in the next meeting when we have one.
So we'll go to Jill.
Amazing. Let me pull up. Update close out. Open it really quick. All right, so just to give an update of where things stand. First, you all got an email shortly before this meeting. They did decide to extend my role through the end of August. So unless I have to line up something else, I will be able to help manage this process through the recommendation to the commissioners. After that, Rachel Sawyer, who is on the Zoom, and her team, they will be taking over the coordination of the passive recreation lands component of the bond. So Rachel manages the Strategic Partnerships Department, and they manage our grant processes, other grants, so like the Strategic Partnership grants. They are very familiar with how to manage a grant process, especially the contract negotiation, which will be that next step after August. And they'll be supported by Ag and by Parks and Finance, just as I've been supported by all of those people. So they will do an amazing job. Rachel, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
You covered it very well. I apologize that I am remote today and only here for part of the meeting, but glad to be a part of the team and work with Allison's team and Jennifer's group and others with the county to make sure this program is in good hands.
And I've been working with Rachel and will continue to work with Rachel really closely to make sure that she is well primed to take over this work. And she's been in the loop on all the conversations we've had about strategy and the priorities for the bond. So it will be as smooth of a transition as possible. So next, just reviewing our timeline. We had our deadline for the applications closed on March 31st. That first week of April, I did the review of all of the applications we received to make sure that they met the eligibility criteria. Our legal team also did a review of all applications to make sure that we had legal authority to fund them if we so choose. And all of the projects passed both of those evaluations, so now they are with the scoring committee. The scoring committee is reviewing all of the proposals and assigning those scores for each of the evaluation criteria, and their deadline for that is May 3rd. So once they've completed their evaluations and we have those scores, I'll be putting all of that information in that score report that I shared with you last month, and then you will get the score report. And then it'll be your turn to do your formal review of all of the proposals. And then finally, our intended timeline for the project selection and presentation to the commissioners is in August. So let's look at the applications we received. So as I mentioned in the email last week, we received a total of 11 completed applications. There were a couple applications that were anticipated that ended up not submitting. Felt their chances were low and didn't want to put in the investment, and that's totally fine. So we got, let's see, 4 projects that had an acquisition component. And then the additional 7 were all improvements projects. These projects ranged in funding requests from about $100,000 to, as you can see, $3.37 million funding request from the town of Lisbon. And the total funding request was $10.9 million across all of these projects. So we had a pretty wide variety. I think it was a pretty good turnout. Some of these projects, or all these projects, are exciting and promising. And so I think you guys will enjoy being able to review them. I did share a packet that included all of the applications that we received. So you guys could go ahead and take a look at those while you're waiting for the scoring committee to complete their evaluation. And if you have any questions about specific projects, always feel free to reach out to me. If I don't know the answer, I can help coordinate the conversation with them.
Is that in a separate email from this one?
No, it was all in one email. Yeah, it's a PDF. I put them in all one combined PDF document so that it would go through as an email. If you try to do them separately, it won't. That's too many attachments, but I can resend that as well. Did you have a question?
I did. So how are we evaluating the cost? So what I'm thinking about is if let's just choose one, Hawk Creek Park Greenway.
Yeah.
So it says that's $102,182. So if they ended up needing more money, or it takes longer to contract, some of the issues we run in with our greenways. What's our communication around? Like, this is the only money you can get, you can come back and ask for more. How are we handling that?
So we don't have a hard and fast policy on that. I know the way we've been discussing it internally is that, like, since this is a grant, that the money they get is the money they get. I think, if there's money still in the pot and somebody, like, there may be flexibility, but I think sticking with the general guideline being that the money they get is the money they get is probably the safest way. But again, we don't have a hard and fast rule on that front. I will say, bringing up the funding request question is great setup, because one thing I want to make sure you guys remember is that we do not have to give them the full funding request. So if one of these projects, the subcommittee decides you want to fund it, you think it's a good project, but you don't want to give them the full, let's say, $1.7 million that they requested, and you'd rather give them a less amount, you have the prerogative to make that recommendation and say, yes, we want to fund this project, but we only want to fund this at $800,000.
Will there be a communication channel established for these? Because it's like something along those lines would be like, if your goal is to buy a tract of land that costs $1.7 million, we're like, we'll give you 80% of that. And it's like, okay, well, the seller won't take 80% of that, and it leaves the hole. And to the same point, if we fund the 1.7, then they come back and like, actually, there's 1.8. I guess it's like, should we develop kind of like a strategy like we have with the Greenway portion of this bond, where we only committed ourselves to spending half of it at first, and we're waiting until these projects are completed before progressing and committing again to another phase?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an approach that we can take. technically the subcommittee does not have to allocate any funding, right? Like if you decide none of these projects are at a place where you think they're in good alignment with the bond, you don't have to approve any of them. So to your point, if you say you want to only fund a few $1 million in projects because you want to have more money to set aside in case they need more in the future, like we can do that. I think to Jennifer's question, like trying to stick with this guideline of the money that we give them is the money we give them, and that kind of forces them to explore additional funding sources is also a helpful way to do it. In terms of the lines of communication, one thing is in my I'm really struggling with my words today, I'm sorry. But a number of these applicants in their proposals, they outline, this is our total funding request. This is what we would like to have, and if you grant us this full request, here's all the great things that you can do with it. But here are our priorities, and so if you aren't able to give us the full request, this is what we would prioritize doing with a lower amount of funding. And so that's in the budget narrative in the application. So when you're reviewing those applications, you can see where they kind of put that priority list. Or some of them did like tiers, where they, if we get 1.7 million, here's what we would do. If we get 1 million, here's what we would do, and so on. But also, if there's questions like that, again, I can, in the intermediary between the scoring committee and the applicants, and between you all and the applicants. So if there's questions like that, I can help manage that conversation. And then finally, those projects that you all select for presentations and site visits, you'll have the opportunity to have that question in person. If you want to explore it further and say, what's kind of your bare minimum funding need that you have to have for this project in order for it to be possible, like you can ask that question in those presentations. And so I think there'll be multiple opportunities to have those conversations. But
Yeah, that was a good outline. Another point I kind of wanted to just bring up is the total of the bond was split evenly amongst the three buckets.
Yeah.
If we choose not to spend, we didn't set hard and fast figures. But is it like, at a certain point, if we look and we're like, well, the ROI on like one of these projects isn't as good as these funds being used in another bucket, can we, like if we don't give out the full 10 million, are we obliged to come back and do a second round of this, or could we make that determination? Not saying that we will, but can we make that determination to be like, this should go into these other buckets?
So I will say, I'm glad you brought this up because there's actually another update that's directly related to this question that might change your thoughts on that. So as you mentioned, we have 30 million total across the full bond. We have not put any hard and fast rule around, X million for greenways, X million for passive rec, X million for conservation. But we've been thinking roughly a third for each. At the last commissioner meeting, I believe, we had a presentation to the commissioners about a separate grant funding opportunity that we were pursuing. And the commissioners expressed interest in potentially setting aside some bond funds for specific projects that they're interested in pursuing. We are currently working out what that would look like, and then we plan on going to the commissioners in a briefing on May 7th, and then to a main meeting on May 21st. We don't have a set amount yet at the briefing. We should of like what that would look like if they do decide to set aside bond funds towards those projects.
Do you know how much is either allocated or committed? Like what just
So
roughly?
the only funds that have been committed so far are the 1.2 million for within Greenway, and then the 400,000 for the 2 conservation easements. There is the heritage trail that we are committed to finishing with bond funds, but we haven't set aside a specific amount for that yet. But we do know that would be part of
I can speak to that. Right now, we don't because we had to change the termini. We've been working with the consultants and the DOT to change the termini at the western point. And so we actually just restarted that process because we couldn't move forward until that termini change was approved by the NCODT. We just got that last week.
So, but I mean, like ballpark, we've only like committed ourselves to spending 3 of the 30, roughly. Ballpark, yes. I guess.
We've only officially committed spending roughly $3 million of that 30 yet, or so far. If the commissioners do decide to set aside funds for these other projects that I mentioned before, that will determine kind of the budget that this subcommittee has to allocate right now. Or like the max budget, I guess, that you all have to allocate, because you can always choose to allocate less than that, right? And as soon as we have that number, I will update you. This came up in the last commission meeting, so it's still very much so a work in progress, but as soon as we have that number, I will share.
So they will take, say, $4 million just out of the 10.
Out of the 30, so
Out of the 30.
it's, I mean, they're not official buckets, right, of 10 or whatnot, but that was kind of our rough goal, was about 10 per each, but we're still figuring out exactly what it looks like, but it's these projects, if the funds are allocated by the commissioners, most of it would be considered passive recreation, but some of it may be considered greenways or conservation easements as well. So once that vote happens in May, we'll know a max of what you guys have.
Okay, so they know that they have to get that done in May because we'll start voting.
Yes, exactly, and that's why it's,
Pass and stuff to get the.
yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
We have Bob has some things.
yeah, sorry, Bob.
Hey, yeah, thanks. I just have a couple of questions. So the combination those are listed as combinations, is that both improvements and acquisition funds that they're asking for?
Yes.
And so there were no requests, no applications for any monies for conservation easements so far. Is that right?
There were, so the Balsam Gardens one, number 5 in this list, that would put actually, let me start from the top down. Haw Creek Community Association, that is a piece of property that is not currently under a conservation easement. So that one would be new conserved property. The Friends and Neighbors of Swananoa, the Woodman Trailhead, that is another one that would put new land under conservation. The Balsam Gardens property would also put new land under conservation. And then Beaverview Mountain would.
So are they asking for easement purchase with any of these funds, or it's just still?
Yes.
And so are they putting that through conservation easements, or are they keeping it all money in passive rec?
All of that is staying in passive, because it's part of their full funding.
So even though it says acquisition, it's not necessarily meaning that the county or anybody's acquiring the land, it's just requiring a conservation easement. Is that more accurate?
So all three, so the Woodman Trailhead, the Balsam Gardens, and the Beaverview Mountain, those would all be new county properties if they are in the way that they're envisioned.
I'm sorry, so new county properties, is that what you said?
Yes, so the county would be acquiring those properties.
Okay, and then there's a conservation easement that will be placed on that land forever, basically, when the county acquires it. Is that right?
Either an easement or some other legal mechanism to make sure that they're being used for passive recreation and not going towards a development.
That's good. That's great. So are any of the acquisitions, are they getting other funds? Like there are a couple trusts in here, like Southern App. They're bringing other money to the table besides the 1 million that they're requesting funding for. Is that accurate?
Yes. Correct.
And we'll
So-
see those matching funds or whatever those other funds are in the application process.
Yeah, that is correct.
So Jill, I think some of the confusion is, did you think you attached the applications to that email?
I thought I did. Did it not?
So we didn't,
I didn't see it, that's what I thought, I was the only one.
It might
So-
have been, the file might have still been too large.
too large, so I see
I'll
people
just-
haven't had a chance to look at
I'm
any
very
of them
sorry.
to get an idea
Yeah.
of what the project is.
Thank you, Jen.
I'll
You
resend
were crazy,
it.
I was like, wait a minute, I don't think I saw that either.
I
went
attached it, but I'm
back.
guessing if it didn't go through, then maybe the file was too large for you to see. I will compress it again.
Or even like 11 individual emails.
Oh, wait a minute, though, it does say show 6 attachments.
Hey,
Maybe they
Jill,
Yes.
Angela may be able to help you set up an actual link where you can
Okay.
give them access to them as individual files.
That would be
A link instead of an attachment.
helpful. Unfortunately, our like county file sharing system, you can't share links outside of county staff. So that's where I ran into an issue, but if Angela knows a way, then I will talk with her and make sure I get you guys. Oh, well, Catalina got it. But that's okay, I'll send links and, that'll be.
Well,
easier.
now I take it back, I have an attachment here that didn't show up originally, but I chose a drop down and found it. It said, I had to choose show all attachments, which I've never had to do before, and then there it was.
I did include a lot of attachments on here.
So I do see it.
But I'll get these links, I'll work with England to get the links anyways and send them as links, because that might be easier for everyone to open and view.
So yeah, 571 pages.
Yes, there they are.
That's
All there.
That's the one. Jill, have you gotten any kind of communication from any other groups saying, well, we weren't able to get our application in this time, but we're hoping that there'll be a second round? Have you heard any of that? I mean, should we keep that in the back of our minds?
Not after the deadline has passed. I heard from different applicants before the deadline passed that were interested in the bond funds, but weren't at a place where they were ready to submit their applications this year. So I think there is interest in that. I think it just really depends on how much you guys decide to recommend. And of course, you guys make the recommendation to the commissioners, I just make the final decision on how much to allocate, but that whether or not there's a future application window largely depends on how much it's funded in this time.
Yeah, I just didn't know whether that's something we should be keeping in the back of our mind.
I know of one from LCAB that missed the deadline. They may have reached out to you from the Light Center.
No, I haven't heard from them, but
Yeah.
I am happy to chat with them if they want to chat. That's the Light Center?
Yeah, it's something that Avni can talk to you about. We're processing LCAB and they need more funds. And I did a site visit last week and
Is that gonna be easement funds though? Because that would come through a different channel, if it's just easement, if it's.
there is a passive rec consideration going on with the board who owns this property currently. Actually, the public currently has some access to the land already. And there's a nice easy trail for handicapped or just easy access trails. There's a couple trails on the property. So they'll reach out to you. I think this was just late last week. So I didn't know whether it was possible to throw something in this round still, or they'd have to wait for another round. But Tom is the gentleman, and Avni has his information too. But yeah, he may be reaching out to you for next round. It is closed right now. I mean, there's no.
Yes, this
Yeah,
round is
so-
closed. But one thing I also wanted to say is if, we don't allocate all the funds this year and there is funds for potential future round. Any of these applicants who applied this year, if you felt this could be a strong project, but it's not at a place where we're comfortable funding it right now, we can always recommend them to come back and apply in a future round, if there is a future round. But our Rachel with Strategic Partnerships, they do that a lot on their grant processes, is if there's a project that wasn't successful one year, they're welcome to apply this year and potentially be more successful. But yes, this round is closed and the deadline, we unfortunately can't accept anything after the deadline.
But I think this is also a good illustration of like not the 10-10-10 buckets, because we have easement purchase in this bucket along with passive. Sometimes they don't just divide out easily either. And so even though we internally sometimes think about it that way, we, I think, long ago internally gave up the 10-10-10.
Yeah.
I know I don't expect 10
Yeah.
on conservation easements.
Well, and I think,
You know,
to your point, even if we end up funding more than $10 million worth of passive recreation projects, some of these projects would include conservation easements, so it's still supporting that bucket. And likewise, some of these could, as you can see, be
Sure,
potential
like
future.
Beaver
green
have
houses.
greenway or, yeah,
Exactly.
Beaver View could be either.
exactly. So I think we proceed thinking about 30, knowing what's already spoken for, and then we make good arguments for projects that we really feel are great and benefit the community, regardless of if it exceeds 10 or exceeds.
Try to think of it as like fitting the spirit of.
Exactly.
Has the deadline for the conservation easements passed?
So we
also?
don't have a deadline on that. It's rolling. As projects come forward, they're considered. So we've had 2 projects come forward and 2 projects be approved for bond funds. And I know there's more coming. But
So
it's just on a
goes
roll,
on
yeah,
until-
till we don't have any more, like, so, and Jill, you can speak to this far better than I, but basically we've done some forecasting.
Yeah.
We've talked to our partners, we kind of know on the conservation side, we know some projects that aren't quite ready to bring forward, they don't have all the information yet, but they have expectation, and we've kind of plugged those in to a degree. We wrote a grant for an agricultural growth zone, which is, we basically get grant money to do easements from the state, and they're giving pots of money away now. So it's $2 million, you have to match it with $2 million, and then you basically can not have to write individual grants for all the properties, you can use that pot of money to do easements. So we know we have $2 million, if we get that grant, we are requesting $2 million match from the bond. That would bring in $4 million in conservation easements, but we haven't heard on that grant.
Part of my role is keeping track of all of that and understanding, what the demands, the already committed demands on the bond funds are, what the anticipated demands on the bond funds, and then making sure we're not over committing ourselves and we're parsing it out in a way that staff capacity can handle, that our that ability to absorb debt can handle, and all that. And once I'm no longer in this role, the finance team will be taking over that piece of managing the bond. So we do have this larger picture of, okay, here's what the full 30 million is, here's how much we anticipate spending on greenways, here's how much we anticipate spending on conservation easements.
Well, speaking of that, originally, when we were talking about this and the greenway part came up, there was some discussion that there was 5 million that from the greenway part that was already committed. But yet what you just said this morning, it sounded more like less than 2 million.
It's not officially committed to that. Roughly 5 million was a guesstimate of how much we expect completing Woodfin and the Heritage Trail will cost. That 1.27 million is the only piece that's been officially committed for the Woodfin Greenway. But we are, it hasn't been voted as a budget amendment yet, but we are, committed to completing both of those projects with bond funds. And our original estimate of how much that would take was about $5 million. It could be more, just as like cost increase are likely to happen. And as Allison mentioned, the termini of the Heritage Trail changed, so that $5 million is really just an estimate, but we're trying to be as generous in that estimate as we could. And once we have more concrete numbers on both of those projects, I'll be sure to keep you all updated. Okay. Any other questions on the summary of applications or the potential set aside of bond funds for other projects? Right. So I did just come up with outline of what these project presentations can look like. I shared with all of you 2 examples from our LCAP process of when they receive project presentations from people pursuing conservation easement funds, as just an example of what those can look like. But this is the information that I think we should recommend applicants to include in their presentations. Obviously, and some of this is going to be repeating what's in their applications, right? But this is a chance for them to speak to it verbally and answer questions. But they can discuss their organization and their experience doing this work, as well as any key partners that they're working with rather. Going over the project itself, what the full scope of it is. This is a great opportunity for them to share additional photos and renderings of the project and speak to those. They can talk about their budget and what within that budget they are asking for bond funds for. And if there's any, key notes that they need to explain about their budget, that's a good opportunity, as well as any non-bond funding that they've already secured. And then I think this project impact is a really important piece of the presentations as well. This is their time to talk about the conservation impact of their project, the impact it'll have on the community, if it's benefiting the underserved communities. That's a great moment for them to speak there. And then also they can touch on the alignment with our evaluation criteria. I didn't create a template for these presentations because I think most of these organizations typically have templates and formats that they use, and I want to give them the opportunity to put into it what they will. But did you all have any feedback on kind of this outline, additional information you'd like to receive in those presentations, or anything you think might be separate?
So they'll be making the presentation here at our meetings?
Yes.
In like what, 2 or 3 at a time?
So it depends on how many projects you want to receive presentations from. So as we saw, there's 11 applications that we received. You do not have to get presentations from all of those. I would recommend you ask for presentations from the ones that you are strongly considering funding. Or if there's any that you are interested in, but you're not totally sure whether it's a good fit or not, the presentation would also be a good opportunity.
So they have not been invited yet?
No.
You're waiting for our group to do that. It's an invitation. And
you have the option to say you want to get presentations from all of them, but that's a lot of presentations you would have to listen to. And if there's any projects that you, upon your initial review, are confident that you don't think you want to fund, you don't need to listen to a presentation. So,
So Jill, I have a question about that. How does that work? So for scoring, I think this is where I'm just trying to make sure I understand. For the scoring sake, we're not requesting presentations from the top scorers necessarily. You're leaving it open for presentation from anyone. So even if I submitted something and I had the lowest score, the committee, you're saying, can say, well, we would like a presentation on that, and then still recommend that.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly.
And that's similar to, I think it's the Ag Advisory Board process, where they have a scoring process, but not always the top scoring projects are the ones that get funded. Because sometimes there's projects that, might be easier to achieve faster than whatever the highest scoring project, or there's other considerations of how it fits into the portfolio of recommendations that you want to make as a subcommittee. But to Allison's point, you don't have to pick only the top scoring projects to receive presentations from. You can look at the full list and decide as a subcommittee which ones you want to kind of move forward.
It also makes sense if there's a project that everybody agrees is a slam dunk, that you want to, we don't need to waste your time.
So like if there's a project that everyone likes, you don't want to.
Well, my thought is if you are 100% convinced that a project deserves funding, then
Yeah.
To me, the presentation would be like for the projects that are kind of like, I want to know more.
Yeah, I mean, again, you guys have the prerogative to choose which projects you want to receive presentations from. I think it would probably be beneficial to receive projects from ones that you want to recommend, just because we have to make that case to the commissioners of why you make the recommendations you did. And I think those presentations might help with that justification, but it's y'all's decision on which projects you want to receive presentations. So, yeah. If y'all have any feedback or thoughts on the format of the presentation, please. If you think of things later, you can always email me.
When I have one other question. I think this came up before, but an opportunity for a site visit.
Yes.
When would be the opportune time to do that? After the initial votes or evaluation?
So the presentations, and we go back up to our timeline, this will help. So this subcommittee, like I said, y'all will receive that score report of all the scores from the scoring committees in early May. And so at the May meeting, I recommend that we use that meeting to decide which projects you want to move forward in the process and which projects you want to receive site visits and presentations from. And then
Site visits and presentations.
Yes.
Early May meeting.
Yeah, in that May meeting. And then in June and July, we can do the site visits and the presentations. I did want to ideally use some of today's meeting to talk about the schedule for those, but since we are missing more than half of our subcommittee, it might be better to just discuss some of that over email. But the site visits and presentations would happen in June and July. I do think we may want to have a couple special meetings in that time frame. I anticipate that even if you only decide to have a select few presentations and site visits, those are going to be longer and meatier, and you're going to want to have time to ask questions and get into the details. So it might make sense to have 2 meetings in June and potentially 2 meetings in July. And then the site visits and presentations would happen.
It's possible that we could do some of the presentations over Zoom also.
Yeah, I mean, we can have special meetings that are entirely virtual. So we just would have to notify.
I'm just a thought.
And can I interject something too here? For our presentations from the land trusts for LCAB, they don't have to be hour-long presentations. Generally, they run about, it could be 10 minutes to kind of give an overview, 15 minutes maybe. So we could probably knock out several in one meeting. They don't have to be real long, I guess is what I'm saying.
And we can put a time limit on them if you guys want. Like we can say the max amount of time you have for your presentation is 15 minutes and then, 15 minutes of discussion time, something like that. And to your point about that, with that kind of boundaries on it, we could do 2 presentations a meeting, and just depending on how many projects you all want to get presentations from would determine how many meetings you need to have during that time. And I do think you're right, we could have some or all of those presentation meetings be virtual if that's easier for everyone's schedule. I would just need to work with Kate to make sure we do this notifications for the special meetings, in a way that we have to do so legally, but that's not her. And then I will help coordinate the site visits as well. I think, given that we don't have very many people here, I'll send an email after the meeting, and if everyone, just a reminder, you guys send emails just to me, because if you send it to everybody, it's technically considered a meeting. But if you, I'll ask you all to send me kind of periods of time within that May through July timeframe that you aren't available, so that I can make sure we schedule around those vacations or work commitments or whatever you've got going on. The site visits, I will say, not everyone in the subcommittee has to attend the site visits. Oftentimes with the other project funding processes, they have just a couple committee members attend, and then those committee members like report back to everybody else about what they saw. So that's just another consideration as we look into scheduling. We don't have to find a time where all 7 of you can go do a site visit.
Right. For LCAP, you know, if one shows up, that's good. At least we've got somebody with eyes on the ground, and it helps to justify our decision. So, you know, you get feedback from the one person. I think the presentations might come first, and then, you know, those who want to go on a site visit soon after that would volunteer to go. But if we had at least one member at each site visit, at least have that, so that we, you know, get somebody with eyes on the ground. That's how we see it at LCAP.
I agree. I think that's a good approach to have. Make sure we have somebody there to look at the project and give insight. And then, yeah, so that was the kind of end of our main agenda. We discussed the presentation format. Again, if you guys do have additional feedback or requests for that, you can feel free to send me an email. The schedule, I will solicit, you know, availability over email as well. And then at the main meeting, I do believe we have to vote for special meetings. So based on your schedules, I'll propose dates and times for the additional meetings in June and July. And yeah.
And so the next meeting in May, we will be voting.
Yes.
So we want to make sure that the other members are aware of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll definitely highlight that in my follow-up, because we'll need to vote on special meetings, and this is another piece too. You may decide you want to have another meeting in May, even if it's just virtual, because in May you'll want to decide which projects you want to have those presentations and site visits for. And you'll have the score report before the meeting, so individually you'll have the opportunity to review that. But that meeting in May will be your time to have a discussion and kind of come to a agreement on which projects you want to have site visits and presentations with. So if we need to have 2 meetings in May, we can do that. We'll just have to vote on it at the first meeting in May.
And that's not a voting meeting either. So not everybody has to be at those presentations, but by doing Zoom, I'm a big advocate for Zoom meetings. It's easier for people to attend, and actually you can hear if the presenter is on Zoom too, it makes it easier for us to hear that person.
For sure.
If the presenter is there in your facility, it's a little harder to hear and communicate actually, versus everybody being on Zoom. If we did have those extra meetings, I'm just suggesting that.
I'll make note of that. All right.
This is exciting, Joe. I'm glad to see so many applicants, and yeah, that's great. It's great. We got lots to choose from.
We got a good turnout. I'm very happy with it. So thank all of you for helping to make the process happen and get the word out. So, Catalina, do we have anyone for public comment? No public comment, but are there any other, you're in charge of the agenda.
Yeah, if there's no other agenda that needs to be discussed, then we can adjourn.
And we don't have a quorum, so we don't have to vote.
We can just say we're done.
But just
All
have-
right, sounds
The
good.
next meeting is the 21st of May, at 12 p.m. And,
That's an important one.